the hearing on Senate Bill 128. Senator Peck has not joined us yet. He will at some point. But what I'd like to return back to is Senator Straub, if you would like. She was cut short yesterday because we were trying to get out in a timely manner. You know, this needs the attention, and it's going to take some time, and that's great. It's a new idea, and new ideas always do take a while to vet and to figure out where we land. So, Senator Straub, if you had any other comments you'd like to make to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, the microphone wasn't on. I really appreciate the opportunity to finish what I had to present to the committee. And I actually went back and watched some of the questions again. So I really don't have anything else to say except that refer to my testimony as printed and presented for you. And I wanted to answer a couple of questions for well, one of the senators isn't here, but I wanted to address some of their questions and some of their comments. Senator Reddy, I believe you had mentioned that you had taught at the Ogden schools for 18 years, and I myself was a substitute teacher in the Ogden School District, or Manhattan Ogden School District, while I was in graduate school. So I fully understand your concerns with that school and the challenges that those students and their families face. And Senate Bill 128 can do so many things for all Kansas kids. It is not just for disadvantaged or underprivileged children, but this is to help all students across all spectrums in all geographical areas of the state. I'm trying to think, one of the things I didn't get to in my facts and figures was the vacancies that we have in teaching positions across the state. We have over 1,637 vacancies, and those might be partially filled by people who are not certified or underqualified in those areas, but they had 683 no applicant positions. That's very concerning, and especially as a parent who wants to educate their child and could actually really use some additional resources to purchase curriculum for my student. And then also I wanted to clarify, I think there was some confusion with Senator Holland on, he kept mentioning nonprofit. Non-accredited private schools are not necessarily nonprofit organizations. Those are actually homeschools. Kansas recognizes homeschools as non-accredited private schools. So I think I wanted to clarify that for people who are not familiar with the education lingo, and I hope that kind of clears up some of those questions. Private accredited schools are registered with KSDE and follow those guidelines for accreditation. Actually, as a former private homeschooler, I would like to be able to be accredited if that were an opportunity, but I really don't believe that it is. So anyway, this is a simple solution to a very, very big problem. We give tax credits for all sorts of things in the state of Kansas. In fact, we have a federal child tax credit, which is exactly what this is. We give tax credits to multi-billion-dollar foreign-owned companies in Kansas. So I really would appreciate the committee's support in funding the education of all Kansas children, no matter what mode of education their parents choose. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I thought about this bill a little bit more since our hearing yesterday, I think there's sort of the policy piece. So that's like, is this good or bad policy? And we'll get to debate that when we work the bill. But as a co-sponsor, it seems like one area that maybe this bill could be improved in if we did decide that it was good policy is that I'm concerned about the tax credit that everybody gets that same base amount, the full amount, even though they may not have made an expenditure in that same amount. So for some folks, they will have paid more in tuition than that base state aid. So that makes sense in that sense. But for many folks, if their child gets a full or partial scholarship, they may not have expended that amount. And so the way I understand most of our tax credit programs to work is that you have to provide proof that you've made a qualifying expenditure in a certain amount to receive that credit. The example I brought up yesterday is if you spend only $2,000 in private school tuition, you still get that full $4,800 plus tax credit. I think that's problematic. Would you be open to an amendment on the bill or to change the bill so the amount that somebody receives in a tax credit is maybe capped at the base aid amount, but that they have to show proof of some qualifying expenditures, and that's the amount of the tax credit that they receive? Because I think that's how most of our tax credit programs work, is you have to, again, show that you made a qualifying expenditure for whatever credit you're seeking. Would you be open to that change?
Actually, no, I would not be open to that change, and here's why. We currently spend over $16,000 per student on average, and that's just on average across the state. I can tell you from personal experience that it is much more expensive to homeschool or non-accredited private school your children than people think. You have transportation costs, you have meals, you have curriculum, you have outings, field trips. It is far more expensive than people realize, and I can tell you that the base aid that the Kansas Supreme Court has determined is the base aid minimum cost of educating a child in Kansas, that does not cover many of the, even just the curriculum costs that you can purchase as a private homeschooler. In fact, the pandemic made a lot of those costs of those curriculums skyrocket. I can tell you, they have over doubled, many of them since the pandemic, because the demand for those curriculums grew so much. So I would not be open to that amendment because I know that it costs far more than the base aid. And if you can do something more efficiently for less money, then more power to you, because that is the wonderful thing about the United States and Kansas, is that we have the freedom to do better, grow, and reach our goals.
Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But I guess if we accept that premise is true, so let's accept that premise is true, that it does cost as much or more than the base aid. What would be the harm in just making folks, in order to get the credit, in making them just show those expenditures that you discussed, which I'm not quarreling with you about, that those are expenditures. It just seems to me, again, like that's just for oversight of the program if we were to enact something like this, making folks show. And so if most folks are going to reach or exceed that base number, if that's in fact true, I'm not arguing that with you. Why not just make folks at least show that? Because what about my example where somebody gets a full or partial scholarship to private school and their expenditure is only $2,000 and they're still getting the $4,800? So again, why not just make folks show that, and maybe they will meet or exceed base state aid in most cases?
I understand what you're saying. It also that would create a ton of more government red tape. And I just don't think it would be cost efficient to do that. Somebody would have to manage that program. We already have a Department of Revenue. We already issue tax credits for so many other things. This would be a simple line item on your tax return.
So if I may, I think there's a little bit of confusion. On a tax credit, he's just saying the credit would be capped at the amount, it would still be a line item on your income tax. It would just be that you had to have the receipts and the documentation in case you were ever audited. And you guys, we do have other conferees, but if you could debate this, I mean,
Yeah.
if there's any other questions or follow-up, that's great.
No, you accurately summarized kind of what I was getting at, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your responses, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for, thank you. Senator Peck, would you like to continue with your testimony? Or how about I ask that you wait until our other conferees that have joined us from out of town finish? Would that be okay, Senator Peck? Okay, I think we're going to go ahead. Representative Trevor Jacobs, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Tax Committee. I'm Trevor Jacobs, representative of the 4th District. You already have my written testimony on why I support this. Of course, I'm not a co-signer of the Senate bill, but this personally would affect me, this bill or this concept. I have had 3 children in private school. I allowed them to choose, would you prefer to go to government school or private school? And there's a weight, you know, with government school, you have a little bit more variety, but with the private school, there's a little more one-on-one. And I felt like giving that choice to my children was a good choice. And of course, they chose private school. By doing that, I've watched my children bloom and grow. I had some issues with some of the curriculum that the government school was putting on my children. And as a parent, I believe I should be able to have the say on where my children will be educated. And as the current conferee or senator had mentioned, there are a lot of costs to it. It's just more than just a monthly tuition or a yearly tuition. Going to different activities, trying to participate, doing fundraisers to help the schools. And I think that this concept here is a great idea that would help supplement some of the costs in this. Of course, paying taxes already for other person's children to go to private or public school, and then versing here I am paying also for my children to go to private school. We've sacrificed a lot. We've given a lot up for our children so that they could, in my humble opinion, have a good quality education at the place of my choosing. This is a voluntary program. You don't have to go through it. I'm not a tax guru by any means, and I'm not an educator as in school, but I am a parent, and I do believe that with parental choice, this bill right here would be so good to have this alternative for the people of Kansas. So I'm not rambling on. I can stand for questions or try to answer the best I can.
Any questions for the representative? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Substitute Chair.
Not even a vice chair.
But I respect your authority nonetheless. But I'll just sort of ask you to see if you have a different response to the same question. Again, I just am sort of like a dog, you know, after a bone with this on this issue of, I just think for accountability purposes, the way that we normally run tax credit programs in all of the other areas that I'm aware of where we offer such tax credits is you have to say, I'm Joe Smith, I'm claiming this tax credit. because I have made an expenditure that I believe qualifies under this tax credit, and here is proof of those expenditures, if asked. Why shouldn't we have that here? Why should this be, to my knowledge, the only tax credit program in the state of Kansas where you don't have to show that you've made any qualifying expenditures and in what amounts you've made those expenditures? Thank you, Mr. Substitute Chair.
Mr. Chair, Substitute Chair.
Any other questions for Mr. Jacobs? Yeah.
Well, I'll do my best anyway. With the base aid here, it's a cap, right, already? And I think, and I understand your question, I do, because myself being a farmer or rancher, there's certain things that we have to write down all the time. I mean, how deep would we go into this? Would it be receipts for gas going to basketball games? Would it be receipts going to any sport activities or academic activities where we're having scholars bowls? Is it, again, looking at the expenses on the farm, are we, the oil changes, the new tire, the time and expense of driving back and forth, the wear and tear, where would we draw the line? How would that program look like, I guess?
Yeah, I guess my follow-up would be, I mean, we've found out with all of our other tax credit programs ways to qualify what is and is not a qualifying expense with every other tax credit program that we offer in the state of Kansas. So I'm sure that we could collectively think of what is and isn't a qualifying expenditure, just because I know that we can do that because we've done that with all of our other tax credit programs, would be my thought. But I appreciate your response.
Thank you, sir.
Committee, anybody have questions? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I understand the good senator's question, so I'm going to pose it in a different way. Because what I'm hearing you in a previous conferee state is that's just for ease, for just the base state aid. Some parents may spend more, some parents may spend less. So to get at the accuracy of it, would you be supportive of an amendment that wouldn't just limit it to the base, but the average cost, average expenditure per pupil that we spend in the state of Kansas? If we're going to go to itemizing expenses and asking parents to do that, then for those that spend more, why shouldn't they get more up to the average expenditure per pupil? Would you be supportive of that?
Mr. Chair, or
Senator Jacob,
I guess I would have to look at the language, and I would, for the base aid as it is, as we've kind of beaten down, is $4,846. And I don't know how that would look right now. I guess I would have to put my brain around it. And I understand both ways, I believe, or the same concept, different question of, I don't know what that would look like, itemizing everything. What the expenditures would be. Would it be just, say, monthly tuition is $300 a month per child, and then there's school, the lunch, paying for the lunches?
Let me, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to simplify it.
Okay.
So what I'm saying, Representative, is if, to me, why it was set it on base, whether parents spend more or less, is for ease of operation, right? It's going to get complicated if we have to make every parent itemize, basically, right? So if we're going to go to that trouble and expense of having a system that does that, why cap it at base state aid per pupil? And by the way, I do believe that the average expenditures are now over $19,000 per pupil for the state of Kansas. So why shouldn't parents then, if we're going to go to the expense of having a system, why cap it at the base? That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, now, thank you. You clarified that for me, and I do agree with that. If there's additional expenditures above the cap, I would be supportive of that.
Thank you.
Mr.
Any other questions? Mr. Jacobs? Senator Reedy. Ready, ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think one of the other issues I have with this is for a homeschool or for a non-accredited private school, the oversight about curriculum or education standards or licensure, whatever it is. When we talk about 17 to 19,000 that's being paid for public schools, there's a lot involved in that because there is so much oversight by the State Board of Education as far as assessments, paraprofessionals, special educators, transportation, all of these things that go into it, professional development for teachers, paraprofessionals, bus drivers, custodians, all of it. So what is the oversight when you're homeschooling or at a private school? Who makes sure that everything is being run well? Because at schools, social workers they have to report if if anyone's being abused, for example. I don't know what the structure is in some of the schools. For some accredited private schools, there might be some structure. For the non-accredited ones, I'm not sure about it. And I think when we use taxpayer funds, people want to know that there isn't. How do they keep track of it, and how do you know it's not being misused? I think that's, when we talk about education especially, if you're teaching one-on-one, definitely your results, your outcomes are going to be better because you're teaching them one-on-one, where a classroom teacher has a lot of people helping them teach, and there's just a lot more involved in that type of teaching environment. So what kind of oversight would there be in such a situation to make sure the skills are being taught or curriculum is being taught or whatever it is for this type of taxpayer funds? Thank you.
Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm understanding your question right, you're asking what type of accountability there is? Yes. Okay.
Who oversees it? I mean, as a parent, you can say, my kid's doing great. But I'm saying who oversees all of that?
Well, if we're talking about just homeschooling, I would say the parent. It would be the parent's responsibility.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Chair, can I ask one more follow-up question?
Go ahead.
So my follow-up is, how do we, what standard would that be based on? Because sometimes there's a reason why doctors don't work on their own relatives, because you get a biased opinion about it. So when you're a parent teaching your own child, how do you gauge yourself compared to the curriculum in general about how well they're doing? And I'm not looking for an exact answer, but I think that's kind of the question I have in my mind. Whether there's an exact response or not, I'm not sure, but oversight is a big, huge factor for me. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments?
Would you want me to respond to that, or? Sure. Okay. Well, there's varieties of curriculum, as you know, and some curriculum is suggested in, whether it's in the government school or you, I don't know, I didn't even know you were here until, but I don't know if you're a mother or not, but of course, being a mother, you know how Susie grows and how Timmy grows, and they're not both on the same standard, but you know what works for her, and you know what works for them, and you'll pour yourself out in either which way to, to try to nurture them, see them grow and succeed and be the best. For curriculum, not all schools follow the same thing, whether it's, and you can have a fifth grade teacher here and a fifth grade teacher here across the hallway, and they're not even following the same way. It just matters on the wisdom and the insight on how you can conduct yourself and teach these little ones how to grow.
Thank you very much. I appreciate.
Yes, ma'am.
Committee, I think we're going to limit the debate a little bit. I mean, we're trying to get everybody in so they have a chance to come up here to testify. They can do that. So we'll move along, and if there's some time at the end, we can go back and answer some questions that you might still have. So that sound all right? Okay, committee. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate your testimony. Next up, we have Nikki Chubb, Sharon Springs. Nikki's here or not? Or she WebEx? Not hearing anything. We'll come back to Nikki. How about Cassie Contringer? There we go. Welcome to the committee, Cassie.
On now? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in support of Senate Bill 128. I am a mother of 3, and I myself experienced public and private school during my K through 12 education, and the same has been true for my 3 children. So I have perspective on both. This year, for my children, we're actually doing a micro school. So it's a combination of public and private. So I have other students that join, and there's 6 students in my class. At each stage, as parents, we just try to make the best choices to meet the children's needs at that time. I think one thing that is super important is that education in Kansas is already really wonderfully defined to allow amazing freedom of choice for families. And I think that this tax credit really supports that in a financial way also. I think there are a lot of families right now that are stifled by finances. They have beautiful plans and strong intentions with educating their children, but finances can hold people back. I myself would love to send my children to a private school, and I have several that I follow and like, and I'm always looking for ways to make that work. But it hasn't yet. I think that this tax bill really makes it more attainable for all families to provide the best education that they can. As it stands right now, families that choose not to go into public building schools, they have to make a lot of sacrifices and a lot of decisions. So in my experience, oftentimes those families have a high enough income that they can do that, or they sacrifice that income and then utilize other state supports so that they can homeschool or choose other options. I think especially post-COVID, there's an explosion of innovative and new ways to educate children. And through that, we're of course finding what works and doesn't work, but this would make it more accessible for everyone. And I think it would create good competition too, that would increase the quality. I think that a tax credit works much better at doing this than any voucher systems or education savings accounts, things like that, because it's not necessary to get into those details of what is it being spent on, how is it being spent. It's, as it's written, it feels very black and white. Either you're utilizing the tax money for public education or you're not. And if you're not, the families that take on that responsibility of educating their own children or choosing a private education, those are most often very responsible families that work hard to make those choices. The way that it's written is clean, easy, doesn't create extra committees and groups that have to oversee and create more regulation and create more complicated systems. I think that there's also, I know my family has experienced situations where we have enrolled through public programs, but then not had access to public supports. So last year, one of my children did a virtual school, and we were enrolled through our local school district, but they denied her access to any of the public school activities, the free lunches, all the things that were part of being, a portion of being part of the public school. But since we weren't attending in person, we were excluded. And I think that that's happening in a variety of ways as education models are changing. I think that a tax credit will also help keep money in Kansas, because some of these programs and ways of providing education are now sending money outside of the state. So I think that this would help Kansas alternative, non public building schools keep that money here.
And I ask you some questions
Yeah.
from the committee a little bit. Committee, any questions for Cassie? Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go on further. And like I said, if we have time at the end, we'll get you to answer questions yet. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Next up, committee, we have Michelle Eagleman from Lawrence. Welcome to the committee, Michelle.
Hello, good morning, Honorable Chairwoman Tyson. No, I'm not sure, you're back. Okay, Chairperson and the rest of the committee members. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak on behalf of this issue that I care about, and it is homeschooling. I think Senate Bill 128 should be adopted. I am a homeschooler, and I think it's so important that the state of Kansas supports and encourages home education on behalf of all students. And the way to do that, I feel, is to support parents. Unlike some previous conferees yesterday, I would submit that the education of our children is not a state duty, but ultimately the responsibility of the parent, and I believe that's an important distinction. As a homeschooler, I've heard horror stories of other states and what other homeschool parents have to go through in terms of reporting and regulation. Kansas has relatively easy terms for homeschooling, and that helps us support and encourage good educational outcomes. I believe Kansas trusts homeschools, and they should. Kansas trusts homeschools unless tax money is involved. Yet when tax money isn't an issue, no one seems to take issue with the quality of home education or how it compares to public school or how maybe our kids are missing out on something. But when tax money is involved, all of a sudden, the state has to make sure that dollars are spent in a responsible way. Is it the child or is it the money? If the student was getting a good enough education before they received a credit, you can rest assured that they're probably getting a better education with it. It was actually right here in this Capitol building at an event called Day Under the Dome in 2013 that I talked to someone who introduced me to the curriculum that we started back then and we actually are still using. And I can confidently say that homeschooling has changed all of my family's life for the better. We have in our state an ideal situation for homeschoolers, which is little to no regulation. We homeschool because we know what we want our kids to learn, how we want them to learn it, and what our values are. My family, a little bit, we have 4 kids, 2 are grown and gone. Both of them were on full academic scholarships. Homeschooling is not easy, especially through high school. And there are expenses. There were years that we took money out of our savings to do what we thought best for our children. Back in 2013, we were new to homeschooling, and like I said, there was expenses that were somewhat eye-opening. But we took the plunge. We've been thoroughly satisfied with our choice. We were able to choose a program that fit our family and our priorities, even if it did put the budget out of whack for a while. And there was a question yesterday about private education, and I just, one of my kids would probably love to go to the private school in our town, but I think $5,000 would probably pay for about a month to go to that private school. So the size of that, hopefully that puts a little bit in perspective. It really is a drop in the bucket. I like SB 128 because it's not about regulating anything. It doesn't come with any red tape or potential red tape. Parents can use a credit as they see fit. They qualify for it by having a registered homeschool and children that qualify. If Kansas really trusts parents, which they obviously do because of the freedom that we homeschoolers enjoy, and I think that we can all agree that the outcomes of private education and homeschool education are impressive, then we need to put our tax money where our mouth is. I also think that it's a good way to continue to encourage education without taking away freedom. So tax credit or a simple, I think Senator Tyson mentioned a carry forward option yesterday, and I'm supporting Senate Bill 128. I think freedom works. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Any questions for Michelle? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your comments. Next up, we ask for Pam McDermott from Lawrence. Welcome to the committee, Pam.
Okay. Well, I'm very thankful to be able to be here and give testimony for this bill, which I'm very supportive of. I would want to answer a few of the questions. As somebody, I'm a parent of 5 kids, adult kids now. I'm actually homeschooling my almost 14-year-old granddaughter. She's with me today. This has been a great education for her to see how this works. And but some of the questions that you all were asking, I think as somebody who's a parent that's been on the ground doing that, when you apply, because our kids I've homeschooled, they've gone to public school, and they've been in 2 private schools in Lawrence. We've tested everything that there was to, participate in. When you apply for a scholarship, which we did in at private schools, at least where I live, there's a formula that they kind of use. And if private schools would know that parents are going to receive a tax credit, they would adjust their formula for giving scholarships. Parents aren't getting out of this. Like, this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, which is kind of what I felt like yesterday. Like, wow, everyone's worried about accountability and that we might get too much money back. No one homeschools or sends their kids to private school as part of their get-rich-quick scheme. And I would just say that in terms of accountability, what oversight, and what's the accountability for these parents that homeschool, I would have the same question for, we've created an enormous education bureaucracy to oversee and supposedly do what's right for kids, and yet almost half aren't proficient in reading or math. And so the way we're doing oversight isn't exactly exceptional, and kids aren't benefiting from it, in my opinion. When parents are the ones taking the responsibility, and I do agree with Michelle that it's the parents' responsibility to see that their kids are educated, whether that's done in their home or they've delegated that responsibility to a school. It's still their responsibility to make sure their kids are learning. And when you do that at home, as I've done, as I did for several years, you stop. There's mastery. You're expecting mastery before you move on. Whereas I think sometimes in public school, a standardized test just shows what a child didn't learn. And that doesn't fix the problem. But when my granddaughter over here misses more than 4 math problems on a test, we go back and review what the problem is there. So I think accountability is a great thing, but all the way around in equal ways. So as I said, I'm a mother of 5 adult kids. They're all older now, and we have 6 grandchildren, so I'm still very much caring about education. And I'm homeschooling her. Our oldest granddaughter attends a Christian school in Lawrence. We've also, our foster parents, we've been licensed foster parents since 1990. And the last 6 years, we've had several teenage boys in our home. And I would say that all but one were functionally illiterate. And there were so many times, I realize this bill doesn't affect that, but I think it's tragic. I wish that there was a way that I could have kept them at home for 1 year or been able to send them to a private school in a smaller classroom size where they could have more attention for just 1 year to catch up on, if nothing else, reading, so that they could learn and read for their life. So
I might need to interrupt you.
yeah.
Time-wise, we want to get a few of that are left.
Yeah. So I'm, I think parents are responsible for the education of their kids. They, that's something that they should take seriously. I had no background or expertise in teaching. I graduated from KU with a degree in French, but I was able to purchase a very simple and inexpensive phonics program because I know that phonics is the tools. Phonics is what kids need to learn to read, to excel in reading, and you should know. I don't know when the last time was you actually were in a public school or looked at the curriculum, but there's very little phonics being taught. And that's why we have the outcomes that we have. And many of the young parents, we pastor a church in Lawrence, and we know several families in our community that homeschool, and that's one reason. If kids aren't learning to be proficient in reading. Kids learn differently, and they need
Pam,
options.
Can we get a few other people in here yet quick?
Sure, yeah. Does anybody have any questions about?
Any questions for Pam here? Seeing none, thank you very much. And
Yeah,
if we have-
sure.
Get everybody
You're
wrapped
welcome.
up, we can get you back. Next up are the proponents on WebEx, so we'll get those folks so we can visit with them. And according to the list here, Connie Harrison on WebEx. Not seeing any response. Linda Highland from Amigo. Is our WebEx working? Okay.
I will let you know, no, your WebEx is not working. Connie cannot get on, so, but I'll proceed with my testimony. Chairwoman Tyson and committee members, I just honor you for your service to the state of Kansas. This education tax credit is possibly more important to families than all the other tax credits that you provide and the exemptions that you provide. In 2020, that total was $10.7 billion in lost revenue every year to the state of Kansas. Students and the teaching profession have been harmed by what happened in 1994, when our nation's schools were moved away from academics toward government-directed outcomes. All in one year, 3 federal education bills passed Congress. Outcomes-based education began. The term social-emotional learning was coined by the Fetzer Institute, who also created the Collaborative to Advance Social-Emotional Learning. Many foundations financed these major shifts in workforce education. A book came out touting emotional intelligence being more important than IQ, and the Communities That Care survey was first given, and Kansas was among the first states to give this in grades 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grades. This began the consistent measuring of students' attitudes, values, and beliefs while they collected massive amounts of data on students. Well, this sounds like a mystery novel unfolding, but it is no mystery what Kansas Department of Education has done to education in the state of Kansas. You see, since 2012, they adopted social-emotional learning as the main curriculum in our schools, and Kansas was the first state to do this. This curriculum also encompasses all subject areas. SEL proponents claim that it will solve our problem of suicide among our youth. But Kansas KDHE data shows otherwise. So before 2012, suicide was not a leading cause of death among our young people. Today, it is the second leading cause of death. Academics are really suffering in our school, and it's a continued downward trend. In 2021, the state average for high school students who are proficient in math was 28%. In reading, in 8th grade, it's 34% proficiency. I would like to show you an article that was front page news in our local newspaper. This was in 2012, where the community was a little concerned that 0.3 percentage point in math proficiency, they had fallen down below the state average, which was 85%. Well, this is just not acceptable to any of us, and I'm sure any of you. This has become a bipartisan issue, and we need help. Parents need help and this bill is a step in the right direction to provide that help. Our children's future, the future of our state, the future of our nation, depends on a proper education. So while we wait for the Kansas Board of Education to overturn SEL and other obstructions to a proper education, the parents need a necessary education without this government intrusion.
Linda, can we go to other
And I
participants?
can conclude with saying that just today, the Tennessee is looking at eliminating even government funds in education in their state. So in closing, I can say that I wish you and parents to know that there are 4 U.S. Supreme Court rulings that place parents in charge of their child's education. So parents have the right today to tell the school in writing their wishes for their student. So I thank you for this opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much. We appreciated your comments. And any questions for Linda before we move on? Seeing none. Jill, I apologize to Connie. You haven't been able to get on still yet? Okay. We'll move on to Sarah Locke from Compton, Kansas.
We have her testimony.
Are you able to hear me?
You're coming. I hear you now.
Okay, thank
Sarah?
you. All right.
Go ahead.
All right.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Hi.
Said welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity today to Senator Honorable Chairman Tyson, Vice Chair Peck, Ranking Minority Holland, and esteemed committee members. I would like to share our story with you to explain why Senate Bill 128 in its current refundable format would be so beneficial to our private homeschool. So we have a little boy who is hearing impaired, and he wears hearing aids to amplify sound, but his brain still needs to see people's lips to figure out what they're saying. When masking became required in schools, my son was no longer able to learn in an environment where his peers and his teachers kind of sounded like a Charlie Brown teacher to him. The public education system we had enjoyed no longer worked for our son. Each individual learner's circumstances are unique, which is why it's so important for parents to have the freedom to choose the educational pathway that meets the needs of our children. It is my responsibility as the parent to ensure that my child is being successfully educated. And if the school my child is in is not able to meet the needs of my child, then I, as a parent, must step in to ensure my child's educational success. For our family, choosing a private homeschool came with a really large price tag with some room materials, and the school provided all the rest. Since we began homeschooling, our family has been paying thousands of dollars per year to obtain the resources necessary for providing a quality education for our children. Things like curriculum, books, printers, toner, laminator, bookbinding, furniture for school, online classes, field trips to make learning tangible, all of the transportation costs associated with that, as well as the fees. Even our grocery bills are higher because our kids are eating at home rather than at school. So in addition to all of these out-of-pocket costs, there's also the opportunity cost we incur by missing out on having a second income, because I don't receive a salary as a teacher of our children, and I can't work a full-time job while shouldering the responsibility of our children's education. We incur all of the financial responsibilities associated with educating our children, in addition to paying for public school costs. As a parent, I'm not choosing a private education to get rich off the government via a refundable tax credit, which doesn't come anywhere close to covering the true cost of homeschooling. I'm just asking to stop paying double for my child's education. Currently, I pay for a public education that my child's not receiving and a private education that my child is receiving. A refundable tax credit equal to the amount for the Kansas-based state aid would lessen the financial load of meeting our children's educational needs and expands our capacity to enrich our children's learning experiences through avenues of education that we haven't had the financial resources for. Currently, educational choice in the state of Kansas is not as free as it could be because the government financially supports only one educational option. SB 128 would allow for true freedom of educational choice by allowing parents a tax credit that balances those choices financially. I think we can all agree that educating our children so that they're successful contributors to society is very important. It is in the state's best interest to support its future generation by allowing the parents who know the individual child's needs best to choose the educational pathway that meets those unique needs without having to pay for an additional educational pathway that we're not receiving. A rising tide lifts all ships, and I respectfully request that you vote to approve Senate Bill 128. Thank you for your time and your consideration. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions for Pam?
Sarah?
Sarah? Any questions at all? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it greatly. We have one more proponent that's on WebEx this morning, and we'll try to make in contact with Mr. John Walker. Mr. Walker? I guess we're going to have to wait till you get to the next time. We'll decide whether we continue the meeting here or let's go to the room. We have Ways and Means Committee next in this room. So I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much for taking over. I appreciate it, you guys. We have a dilemma before us. We have opponents to the legislation, too, that would like to testify. So would you like to continue at 1 o'clock this afternoon? The room is available, and we could continue at 1, or we can continue Monday at 9:30 a.m. What are the wishes of the committee? And I know you've traveled, so you would like to be at 1. At 1. So you would rather be Monday at 9:30? Okay,
I'm available both days.
Monday at 9:30 then. Is that okay with everyone? Dan,
Yeah.
Senator Kirshen, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Monday at 9:30. Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys. I know you've been waiting for 2 days. So thank you guys for your consideration. It is a very interesting topic, and we have a lot of viewpoints, and we want to make sure that the committee gets to hear it all so that we can make an informed decision. Committee, is there any other business to be brought before us? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.